The global food system has a built-in trap, and it is springing shut right now in the one place you feel safest, your kitchen cabinet. We aren't talking about the widely publicized luxury inflation or the sudden spikes in high-end ribeye steaks. The real crisis is quiet, structural, and far more dangerous. It is happening to the invisible foundation of your daily diet, the 12 items you grab from the grocery shelf on sheer autopilot without checking the price tag. Rice, oats, cooking oil, canned tomatoes. Items that for 3 generations represented the baseline of human survival, the cheap fillers used to stretch a budget when everything else went wrong. Except right now, those exact fillers are undergoing a massive, synchronized repricing that is fundamentally changing how families eat. And almost nobody understands the mechanics behind it. To understand just how deep this trap goes, you have to look at the 7th item on this list. It is a substance that defies the laws of decay. When archaeologists cracked open the sealed tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, they discovered jars of this exact food buried thousands of years ago. They tasted it, and it was still perfectly edible. Nature designed it to be virtually indestructible over millennia. Yet today, in 2026, this ancient marvel has become one of the most volatile, price-sensitive, and high-risk commodities in the entire modern supply chain. The reason for its sudden instability has absolutely nothing to do with the food itself, and everything to do with a quiet collapse in the ecological infrastructure supporting our entire agricultural system. This isn't a temporary blip, and it isn't something a single good harvest season can fix. What we are witnessing is a permanent structural shift. For decades, the global food economy operated on a flawed assumption that basic carbohydrates, fats, and pantry staples would always remain endlessly abundant and practically free to produce. That illusion has shattered. Across every major agricultural corridor, a convergence of depleted water tables, irreversible climate shifts, soaring industrial input costs, and a hidden war between the food and energy sectors is rewriting the economics of dinner. The cheap margin that kept the modern household afloat is gone. While the headlines focus on the stock market and interest rates, millions of families are quietly standing in grocery aisles, looking at items they have bought for 20 years, and putting them back on the shelf in silence. Before your next grocery run, you need to understand exactly what is happening to the 12 items holding your kitchen together. The structural breakdown of the global food baseline did not occur overnight. It is the direct consequence of a decades-long geographic trap and a series of fatal macroeconomic calculations that are now coming due simultaneously. For the last half-century, industrial agriculture optimized the global food supply chain for a single variable: absolute maximum efficiency at the lowest possible immediate cost. This system required predictable weather patterns, cheap fossil fuel-based fertilizers, and unlimited water extraction. In 2026, every single one of those foundational pillars has fractured, transforming the most basic items in the grocery cart into high-risk commodities. To understand the depth of this geographic trap, look at the historical trajectory of beef production in the United States. Between 2020 and 2025, the American West and Great Plains experienced a series of severe, compounding droughts that permanently altered the landscape. Ranchers across Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, states that historically managed more than 30% of the national cattle inventory, faced a catastrophic lack of forage. By the end of 2024, stock ponds evaporated, and the cost of supplemental feed like alfalfa and corn surged by over 40% due to parallel crop failures, faced with zero grazing options and skyrocketing operational costs. Commercial ranchers made the desperate economic decision to liquidate their breeding herds. They sent heifers and cows to slaughter early, rather than keeping them to reproduce. According to data from the United States Department of Agriculture, this mass liquidation dropped the domestic cattle inventory to 86 million head by early 2026. This is the absolute lowest level recorded in the United States since 1951. The mathematical reality of this shortage is unforgiving. A beef heifer requires approximately 2 years to reach reproductive maturity and carry a single calf to term, and that calf requires another 18 to 24 months to reach market weight. Therefore, even if perfect climatic conditions return to the Great Plains tomorrow, the supply chain cannot physically recover for a minimum of 4 to 5 years. The market is completely locked into a structural deficit, forcing retail prices for ground beef to climb towards $10 per pound. A parallel yet completely separate geographic bottleneck hit the global oat supply. Historically, oats were the ultimate budget safety net, a resilient cold-weather crop grown primarily in the northern plains of the United States and the prairie provinces of Canada, specifically Saskatchewan and Alberta. These regions traditionally supplied over 70% of the oats processed for the North American market. However, between 2021 and 2025, the jet stream destabilized, bringing alternating cycles of historic summer droughts and late spring floods to the Canadian prairies. In 2021, Canadian oat production plummeted by 43% in a single season. While production ticked up slightly in subsequent years, the underlying soil moisture deficits remained uncorrected. This supply contraction occurred at the exact historical moment that consumer demand for oats underwent a massive, high-margin transformation. The rise of oat-based dairy alternatives and premium health foods shifted millions of tons of grain away from the budget breakfast aisle and into high-end processing facilities. Industrial food corporations could afford to pay double for raw oats because they were selling a liquid alternative at a 400% markup. The humble oat, which had survived for centuries as a low-cost staple for the working class, was suddenly caught in a bidding war between multinational beverage companies and cash-strapped families. Simultaneously, the global coffee market entered a state of permanent structural repricing. The entire global infrastructure for coffee relies almost entirely on two specific geographical choke points: the Arabica highlands of Brazil and the Robusta lowlands of Vietnam. Together, these two nations dictate more than half of the world's total coffee output. Beginning in 2023, Brazil's primary growing region, Minas Gerais, suffered an unprecedented combination of severe winter frosts followed by prolonged heat waves. Coffee trees are highly sensitive botanical organisms. A severe frost kills the delicate branches, requiring farmers to prune the trees down to the stump, which completely halts production for 3 full years as Arabica supply dwindled and futures prices spiked by 70%. Global food conglomerates attempted to hedge their costs by substituting Arabica with cheaper Robusta beans from Vietnam. This sudden shift in demand collided with a devastating multi-year drought in Vietnam's Central Highlands, driven by a powerful El Niño cycle. By late 2025, the scarcity of Robusta beans drove global wholesale coffee prices to 40-year highs. The retail consequence in 2026 is absolute. The economy-sized plastic tubs of ground coffee that working-class households relied upon to get through the work week reached an average national price of nearly $10 per pound. Because caffeine is a highly addictive commodity with inelastic demand, consumers did not stop buying it. Instead, they began cutting back on other essential household expenses to fund their morning routine. This economic pressure extends directly into the carbohydrate core of the kitchen: pasta and rice. The geographic trap for pasta lies in the specialized fields of North Dakota, Montana, and the Mediterranean basin, where durum wheat, the hard high-protein grain required to make semolina, is grown. Durum wheat cannot easily be substituted with standard bread wheat because it provides the structural gluten necessary for pasta to hold its shape. Between 2022 and 2025, historic heatwaves across Italy and France, combined with extreme topsoil erosion in the American Midwest, caused global durum stockpiles to drop to their lowest levels in 2 decades. When regional millers competed for the remaining grain, the cost of raw semolina soared. For a product like pasta, the raw ingredient is only a fraction of the final cost structure. The manufacturing process requires enormous amounts of natural gas to heat the drying kilns where fresh pasta is dehydrated for shelf stability. When global energy markets localized and prices stabilized at structurally higher baselines after recent geopolitical conflicts, the cost of operating these industrial drying facilities doubled. The final box of spaghetti sitting on a supermarket shelf in 2026 represents the accumulation of expensive domestic energy, high-cost international freight, and an increasingly scarce agricultural input. The absolute baseline of cheap home cooking has been systematically dismantled by geography and geology. The structural crisis in the kitchen expands rapidly as we move deeper into the fundamental ingredients that households use to maintain their nutritional baseline. This is the reality of the current market. The traditional safety nets are failing simultaneously. The deep dive into this systemic collapse reveals an acute conflict between industrial output limits, changing climatic realities, and a massive shift in raw consumer survival strategy. To understand how the situation has reached a dead end, analyze the sudden and unprecedented pressure on dry beans. Historically, the dry bean market was exceptionally stable. Grown primarily across North Dakota, Michigan, and parts of Minnesota, dry edible beans like pinto, navy, and black beans served as the absolute lowest cost per protein unit available to the public. However, by early 2026, a sharp clash of interests occurred between agricultural land allocation and corporate farming initiatives. Over the preceding 48 months, massive agribusiness conglomerates aggressively converted traditional legume acreage into more lucrative corn and soybean fields, which are highly subsidized by federal programs and heavily demanded by the biofuel industry. This systemic reduction in acreage caused domestic dry bean production to fall by nearly 20%. At the exact moment that production capacity shrank, inflation forced millions of lower-income families to abandon animal proteins entirely and turn to dried legumes for basic survival. A 1-pound bag of dry beans provides roughly 12 servings of complete fiber and protein. In early 2026, grocery store tracking data showed a 35% surge in volume demand for dried legumes across the bottom 2 income quintiles. This sudden influx of millions of budget shoppers into a shrinking, low-supply market triggered an immediate retail price reaction, stripping away the final affordable sanctuary in the grocery store. The escalating crisis is further illustrated by the profound volatility of the honey market, which directly exposes the fragile ecological foundation of the broader agricultural sector. In the United States, commercial honey production is concentrated heavily in North Dakota, South Dakota, and California. According to the annual reports issued by bee research organizations, honey bee colony mortality rates reached an alarming 48% over the recent winter cycles. This collapse is driven by a lethal combination of parasitic varroa mites, acute pesticide exposure, and severe extreme weather anomalies that disrupt the natural blooming cycles of native flora. As domestic production plummeted to historic lows, a shadow market emerged. To meet consumer demand, large-scale distributors significantly increased imports of cheap, ultra-filtered honey from overseas hubs, frequently routing shipments through third-party countries to obscure the original point of origin. Laboratory testing by food safety watchdogs revealed that a substantial percentage of these imported products are systematically adulterated with industrial corn syrup and rice sweetener. For consumers seeking authentic, raw local honey to avoid these adulterated blends, the price has skyrocketed past $15 per jar. This is no longer just a luxury sweetener crisis. It is a critical warning sign because honeybees are the primary pollinators for 1/3 of the crops consumed by the population. Their decline directly compromises the future use of fruits, nuts, and vegetables across the entire agricultural grid. This supply-side destruction is mirrored precisely in the olive oil aisle, where the situation has moved from an isolated regional issue into a permanent global crisis. The Mediterranean basin, specifically Spain, Italy, and Greece, produces more than 70% of the global supply of extra virgin olive oil. For 3 consecutive growing seasons leading into 2026, Spain's primary producing region, Andalusia, suffered under unprecedented summer heat waves where temperatures consistently exceeded 45 degrees Celsius. Entirely desiccating the olive blossoms before fruit could form, the physical toll on production was absolute. Spain's traditional annual output of 1.3 million metric tons dropped by more than 50% in consecutive years. By early 2026, global olive oil reserves were completely depleted. This severe physical shortage caused international wholesale prices to break all-time records, surging to over $9,000 per metric ton. At the retail level, a standard mid-range bottle of extra virgin olive oil that cost $9 in 2021 now carries a retail price tag of $24 to $28. Major supermarkets have responded to this extreme price hike by placing electronic security tags on olive oil bottles to combat an unprecedented wave of inventory theft. The financial pressure then cascades down into the ultimate pantry filler: canned tomatoes. The processed tomato industry in the United States relies almost exclusively on California's Central Valley, an area responsible for over 90% of the domestic harvest. The cultivation of processing tomatoes requires massive, highly predictable water allocations. Between 2023 and 2026, state water authorities severely restricted irrigation deliveries to Central Valley farms to preserve critically depleted reservoirs. Concurrently, the price of tinplate steel, the raw material required to manufacture food cans, rose by 30% due to global supply chain disruptions to domestic industrial tariffs, faced with restricted irrigation, escalating packaging costs, and a 22% hike in regional agricultural labor wages. Processing facilities raised their wholesale prices significantly. A standard 15-ounce can of crushed tomatoes, which historically hovered at 99 cents, now routinely retails for nearly $2. While an increase of $1 appears minor on an individual receipt, it represents a 100% price increase for a foundational ingredient used by millions of families to stretch loose ingredients into affordable meals. The cumulative impact across a monthly household budget is severe, removing yet another pillar of kitchen stability.